When the market says to the government, we don't care what you say, we know what's going on, and the market takes over, then you see interest rates get out of control or currency collapse. I mean, whenever the market realizes, oh my gosh, these people are in trouble, and the market does that, it's not fun. If I were buying one today, I would buy silver. But I own both. I'm not selling either. I expect to buy more. Who knows when? Because I do know, Danny, that when things go really wrong, we always, all of us peasants, want some gold in the closet. We want some silver under the bed. Because we know whether it's right or wrong. The academic economists will tell you, ignore silver, ignore gold. Okay, I'm an old peasant. And us old peasants know we better have some when things go wrong.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Capital Cosm. Today, we've got the one and only Jim Rogers back on the show. Jim, it's fantastic to have you on again. Thank you so much for coming back on.
I am delighted to be here, Danny. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is.
Yeah, Jim is on the other side of the world over there in Singapore. So you are as far away from me as humanly possible. So I
Yes.
appreciate you carving out the time. Well, Jim, let's
Well,
just
I'm
go ahead and dive right in. What is kind of like your overview of the economy right now? Like if you were to paint broad strokes, what do you see out there from a 35,000 foot view perspective?
You're talking about the U.S. economy, I presume. Are you talking
Oh, we
about
can
the
talk about the
Georgia
US and the
economy?
world economy at large.
Well, we can talk about Georgia if you want to,
Go right
for
ahead.
that matter. Well, I mean, the world is having a wonderful time. We haven't, I'll use the U.S. first. The U.S. hasn't had a problem since 2009. That's the longest in American history. And it doesn't mean it's not going to go 50 years. Janet, the Treasury Secretary says, oh, we understand everything now. We've solved all the problems. Well, if you believe her, and I don't, but if you, I mean, she's got 2 Ivy League degrees, she says everything is okay. I'm telling you, I see signs developing that I have seen before that this is going to come to an end. Not this month, not this week, but fairly soon.
So you alluded to,
So things are great. Look out the window. You'll see things are great. But
yeah,
don't get too excited.
yeah. Well, it's kind of dark outside. If I look out the window, I'm not going to really see much right now. But point taken. You mentioned Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary. What do you think of Powell, though? He's risen rates with the fastest interest rate hike in U.S. history. What do you make of the actions that he's undertaken?
Well, I mean, I've been watching and reading about the Federal Reserve for many years. I cannot remember. Most of them have no clue what they're doing. We've had a couple of good ones in American history and in world history, but these guys don't have a clue. I mean, I have to pay attention to the central bank because it is the central bank, the most important in the world. But I certainly don't think they know, I certainly don't pay attention to what they say because I know they don't know what they're doing. But they do have a lot of power because they have a lot of money. They got a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely for sure. With interest rates being as high as they are, like I kind of pointed out, we did go through the fastest rate hiking cycle in history. What are you kind of seeing out there? Do you think that they can keep rates higher for much longer given the debt burden, or will they have no choice but to keep the rates high as they are, with potential second wave inflation coming down the pike?
Well, I certainly know that inflation is not over. I know it's going to continue. It's going to get worse. But the question is, as you well point out, what do they do at that point? Because there's staggering debt in the U.S. at the government level and every other level. So if they raise interest rates a lot, it's going to lead to a calamity in the economy, and they want to keep their jobs. They don't care about you and me. They care about their jobs. But if they raise interest rates too much, they'll lose their jobs, and they don't want that. So they're going to be in a bind. What
Yeah.
should be done is interest rates should have been higher sooner to
Hmm.
solve this problem, but they don't care about that.
Yeah, so oftentimes people conflate the market with the economy, the stock market, that is. Now, the stock market's been making new all-time highs almost daily now, albeit consolidated within three big companies. You've got Nvidia, you've got Alphabet, and you've got Microsoft, and you've got a few other tech companies that are really holding up the rest of the market. Um, is there a difference between what we're seeing in the markets today and what we're seeing in the real economy? Meaning, um, in much the same way that we're seeing an all-time high in the stock market, are we seeing all-time high positive growth in the economy, or have the two been dislocated?
Well, they're not dislocated yet. There are many parts of the economy that are doing extremely well right now, not just in the stock market, but in the real world. And that's going to continue for a while. But as you well know, at least if you read the press, there are some companies that are starting to feel problems. It always happens this way. You know, we look back at previous economic periods. A few companies start having problems, and then the next thing you know, many others have problems, and the next thing you know, it's on the evening news, and we have a recession. We're not anywhere near that yet, but I can see things starting to move in that direction.
Do you believe that we're already in a recession, given that the way recessions are kind of defined is in terms of a lagging indicator? So, are we in a recession right now? Are we yet to go into one? What do you think, Jim?
Well, some companies, some industries, from what I read, seem to be having problems now. And so it depends on who you are. If you're company X, we're in a recession. If you're company Y, we're in boom times. So it's not across the board yet.
Right. So, in times of a recession, you have a phenomenon called obviously deflation. We are in a highly inflationary period in time. Um, where do you think inflation and deflation kind of fit here? Are we looking toward, when we do hit that recession, if we haven't hit it already, will we see deflation kind of bring everything down? Or are we just kind of stuck in this stagflationary environment where you kind of get the worst of both worlds, right? You get supply side inflation with demand side slump. What
Well, that will depend on Washington. And as I said, Washington wants to keep their jobs. Doesn't matter whether you're Congress, the central bank, whoever you are, everybody will do everything they can to bail us out. That's not the right thing to do, if you ask me, but that's what they will do because they're going to have a lot of complaints, a lot of phone calls saying, save me, save me, save me. And when they get enough phone calls saying, save me, they will try to do something. And so there will be stimulus of some kind, which will just add to the problem, certainly the long-term problems. You know, the United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. No country in history has ever been this deeply in debt, and it's getting worse every day. Annie, this has never ended well for any country that's gotten itself into this kind of situation. So look out the window and get worried.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with a debt to GDP ratio of 130%. Historically, the benchmark is around 90 to 100% when you start seeing a sovereign debt crisis occur. How much longer can they actually kick the can down the road? I mean, we're at 130% debt to GDP ratio. You've got about 30 plus trillion dollars in sovereign debt. That's not even counting the 150 trillion plus in unfunded liabilities. And then you've got the 5.5% interest rate on top of it to service that debt. Uh, how much? It kind of begs the question: like, do they sacrifice the dollar and just inflate themselves away from this debt, or do they just default?
Well, one of the interesting things you mentioned is the unfunded debt, or at least the off-balance sheet debt, whatever you want to call it. It's gigantic. There's no way that America can ever pay its debt. I mean, this is simple arithmetic. I'm not trying to scare you or anything. I'm talking about addition and subtraction and population. I mean, Danny, it's a good time to be an old American. because I don't have to pay it. But my children, I've got a couple of young children. Oh my gosh, the problems they're going to see in their lifetimes as American citizens are going to be horrendous. 100 years ago, in 1924, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two. 50 years later, Britain was bankrupt. And that's not an exaggeration. The IMF had to fly to London and pay the bills. They were literally bankrupt. So they went from a gigantic number one to total bankruptcy. So it's happened before. And I mean, I can add, I can subtract. And there's no way that America can pay these debts.
Kind of add to your point as well. Britain did have the British sterling as the world reserve currency at some point before the USD took the mantle. And it took about a couple of decades for that to unwind. Now, you have been hearing this story of de-dollarization make its way with the BRICS alliance, trying to figure out a settlement currency amongst themselves. Saudi Arabia letting their petrodollar agreement expire. Some may say there wasn't really a petrodollar agreement. Some say that they might just, pick back up from where it left off. But nonetheless, the trend is quite clear, and it's a movement away from the dollar. The question is, what inning are we in this de-dollarization process? Does the dollar still have a lot of runway to go, or are we in the middle of this process, or are we just at the very beginnings?
Well, Danny, unfortunately, Washington keeps accelerating it. If Washington doesn't like you, they cut you off. They say,
Mm.
okay, you cannot use the dollar anymore. Well, everybody notices that. Even our friends are starting to say, wait a minute, they could do that to us too, because they've done it to many people. And so not just you who understands the world and me who can read the newspapers, many countries, including our friends, are starting to look for an alternative to the US dollar, accelerated by the fact that we're the largest debtor nation in world history. So for political and economic reasons, people are beginning to move away or look for something else. And you ask when it's going to happen. I don't know. Why don't you watch Danny's show? He'll tell you when. And I know it's getting closer. And I would suspect that in the next recession, the next recession which the U.S. is involved, it will accelerate because the debts are so staggeringly high. You will start to having problems with companies and industries, U.S. companies, and that will make more and more people scared. So I would suspect in the next recession or two, it's going to be horrendous. So I say it's a good time to be old.
How do I get older, Jim? How can I make myself older?
Well, I'm not sure that's the best solution. I'm just saying if it happens,
Right.
accept it. Accept it.
No, but you make a really good point. So you have all of these incentives now from these BRICS nations to actually get together and figure out a settlement currency. And if you look back over the last decade or so, BRICS came into formation, I want to say early 2010s, but then you really didn't hear much of them for, close to a decade almost. They kind of went radio silent between the period of 2015 all the way out until 2022. And then in 2022, they started reemerging again. And coincidentally enough, or maybe it's not a coincidence, obviously not, that was the start of the Ukraine war and when the United States kind of shut off Russia. And much to your point there, that's when all these nations started looking at each other and they said to themselves, well, that could be us. Well, we better figure out a way to circumvent that. Is that kind of your assessment?
That's exactly. I mean, you read the same press I read. No, that's what happened. The U.S. starts cutting people off, and so everybody says, "Oops, wait a minute, that could happen to us." And I mean, BRICS actually theoretically started sooner than that, but that's not them very important. Whether it's BRICS or whatever you want to call it, the whole world is starting to say, "Uh-oh, what will we do?" Because if they cut us off, what do we do? And the US dollar is the world's international currency right now. And so if you start cutting people off, they're in a bind, and nobody wants to be in that bind. And I don't like saying it, Danny, but the whole world sees what Washington, first of all, they see our problem of being the largest debtor nation in history getting worse every week. And then they see Washington cutting people off, including our friends. So everybody has to worry.
Yeah, it's an abdication of the rule of law. I mean, you've got to real people have to realize that a lot of the reasons why capital flew into the United States is because of the rule of law. We were ruled by men, ruled by law, not men. And so when you put your capital here in the United States, you can rest assured that you were protected by that law. And when you begin to untangle that, that begins to kind of send the wrong signals out to the international community. Um,
But so you're not the only person in the world who understands what you just said, nor am I. Many people realize what will we do if there's a problem. So we cut Russia off. We were very friendly with Russia 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We cut them off. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just saying it happened. And so many other people see that too. And they're worried.
do you think they'll do the same thing with China? Should a conflict with Taiwan emerge?
If there's war over Taiwan, of course, if there's war with anybody, they'll cut you off. Whoever you are, if there's war with Canada, they'll cut the Canadians off. I don't know. By the way, I once knew Canadians who would not put their money in the US because in the Second World War, a long time ago, America would not, I mean, they cut the Canadians off. The British and the Canadians were our allies in the Second World War, but still Washington cut them off. And I used to know, not anymore, but there were people who remembered that decades later, and they would, if they invested in the US, they would only invest through third countries because they didn't want to take the risk of being cut off. So it's happened before. Unfortunately, I'm afraid it will happen again.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly looking that way. So what should be on the radar screen for like the average retail investor out there? Like what should they be on the lookout for?
Well, everybody should only invest in what they themselves know a lot about. If you invest in things you understand, and you don't have to listen to me or people on the internet, you will know if something goes wrong, you will know what to do. If you invest in something that Joe told you about and something goes wrong, you don't know what to do. You don't know why you invested in it in the first place. So the primary rule of investing, if you ask me, is stay with what you know. Don't listen to the newspaper. Don't listen to the TV. Just stay with what you know, and you might survive. You still will make mistakes, but you might at least survive.
Yeah,
So you ask me what people should do, stay with what you know and not listen to me.
sounds good. Well, we do have this election coming up in November here in the United States.
We
Do
hope.
you huh?
We hope
Yeah,
we
we
have an
hope so.
election coming up.
Big asterisk right there. Um, is there a big difference that you see between Trump or Biden or whoever they put, whoever the candidates are at the time, um, for the economy, for the markets? This channel is heavily focused on commodities. I just got done interviewing Doomberg a couple of days ago, and he kind of spit out a factoid that um, commodity markets typically do better under Democratic administrations because of the supply bottlenecks and so forth they kind of bring about. But would either would a Trump presidency part two materialize into anything substantially different from what we're seeing today with Biden, and then vice versa as well?
Well, if you look back, and both of them have been president before, I don't see that there'd be much difference. I don't see that Mr. Trump is going to save the day, and I don't see that Mr. Biden will save the day. So I don't see I don't see good times with either of them, and I imagine it's going to be one of the two. I mean, although apparently Mr. Biden is having problems right now, so if he's replaced, I don't see that his replacement's going to be much better. Everybody will be excited the first week or two because it's a change, but I don't see that whoever replaces him is going to save the day either.
Yeah.
And we have gigantic debt. And the gigantic debt, if you look at the numbers, just look at 2024, the debt keeps skyrocketing. It's as though these people in Washington don't read the newspaper. They don't know what's happening.
Yeah. How do they keep this debt bubble going though? Like, isn't like when do we see a breaking point?
Well, if you look back in history, the worst part is when the market forces a breaking point. As long as the capital, the government is in charge or trying to be in charge, at least there's hope. But when the market takes over, when the market says to the government, we don't care what you say, we know what's going on, and the market takes over, then you see interest rates get out of control or currency collapse. I mean, whenever the market realizes, oh my gosh, these people are in trouble, when the market does that, it's not fun. Stocks go down, interest rates go higher, inflation goes through the roof, the currency collapses. Unfortunately, in many cases, countries put on exchange controls to try to limit you. You know, they say, okay, if you want to go to London, you can take $50. That's all you can take. You know, they do everything to control you. They don't care about you. They care about trying to save themselves. And it gets really, really bad.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of zoom out and look at the geopolitical side of things for a bit. We do have multiple theaters of war ongoing at the moment. Luckily, they haven't escalated into a world war. But nonetheless, what is kind of like your overall take on the geopolitical side right now?
Well, you read the same things I do. We have at least two wars going on right now, the possibility of three or four. And unfortunately, historically, the way problems really get bad is you have a little war here and then a little war there, and people don't pay too much attention. But the next thing, it's on the evening news because there's a big war, and people start really, really shooting at each other, and things escalate. I mean, I hope, my gosh, I hope it doesn't happen again. But just read the beginning of every war. You know, every time people said, "Oh, don't worry, this is simple. That won't be the things will be solved by Christmas." Well, they never have been, and that's the risk. And we're all human beings. We have been human beings for a few thousand years, and human beings make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. So the other week or so, the Serbian president came out. I don't know if you saw this or not, but he came out and he said that we will have a world war in the next 2 to 3 months. Now,
Months.
that's what he said. Months. Um, yeah, but in your assessment, um, do you think it's more likely than not that we do have that this world war does go kinetic? Is that, a 50+% probability in your assessment, or are we still, is there a way that we can get ourselves out of it that's not kinetic?
Well, it's interesting. You know, Serbia is where the First World War started.
Interesting,
So
yeah.
maybe he's speaking from experience. I don't know. Is there a way out of it? Of course. Yes. Rational, sane people can sit down. And every time a war breaks out, 6 months or a year later, people say, how did this happen? How do we get out of this? And the problem is, it's almost impossible to get out of a war once you're in it because passions, emotions, who knows, facts erupt on both sides. And it's hard to get out of these wars. Every war, people will say it will be over soon, and it never is. So, how do we get out of it? We all sit down and say, let's not do it. But unfortunately, there are always people who sit down and say, we'll show those jerks, we'll kill them, we'll teach them a lesson. And they get worse. I wish it were not, but I mean, I've read enough history to know it always gets worse.
Yeah, yeah, you mentioned
And you
two.
say you say 2 or 3 months. Oh my gosh,
Yeah, that's
I
what
would
he
even
said.
say. I would even say 2 years is too soon, 2 or 3 years, but it could happen.
Are you in the market for gold and silver? Then, if so, please consider Miles Franklin. They are my gold and silver dealer of choice. So, not only do they have super competitive prices that you're going to have a really hard time finding elsewhere, but then they also have top notch customer support. I know Andy Schechtman, the owner of Miles Franklin, top notch guy. I wouldn't be recommending them to you if I didn't have faith in their product mode. What you really want to do, however, you want to email them at info@milesfranklin.com, and you want to say that Capital Cosm sent me in the description line, because when you do that, you can get access to their special pricing sheet. You want to get that special pricing sheet because you're going to get special prices that you won't find on the website itself. So email them at info@milesfranklin.com. Tell them that Capital Cosm sent you, and you won't be heckled with spam emails, etc. There's no commitment necessary. I promise you that. And with that said, I will let you get back to the video. Yeah, hopefully not. But where would you say the United States has the most financial kind of stake at when it comes to these theaters of war? You've got the Ukraine-Russia war. You've got the things going on in the Middle East with Israel. You've got the things going on in the South China Sea with China and Taiwan. You also have South Korea and North Korea. Where does the financial incentive lie the heaviest from the point of view of the United States from any one of these theaters?
Well, it's what I read. I mean, the U.S. stock market's making all-time highs.
Right.
I don't think anybody's even mentioning war except you and me, because we're on your show. But I suspect if you read any newspaper in America tomorrow, there's no discussion of war. Certainly not a big war. Yeah, they talk about Ukraine, etc. But I don't think anybody, including Taiwan, has any clue that there might be a war in the South China Sea. Should there be? No, of course not. But could there be? Of course. That's how wars start. It always starts in some place where people say, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. When you read that, Danny, worry.
Yeah. Where do you see as the likeliest trigger for a kinetic war for World War to go kinetic?
Well, somebody in Washington will make a mistake. You go back and look at look at I'll use the U.S., look at the war between the states. I mean, Montgomery, where the capital was then, made a mistake and said, shoot the cannons. We'll show them. And so they shot the cannons. And the next thing, nobody wanted a war. Nobody even thought there'd be a war, including Lincoln. But some bureaucrat said, show them. And the next thing you know, we couldn't get out of it. We lost more American citizens in that war than any American war ever in history. Was it rational? Of course not. But it happened. And that's how these things happen. You look at the First World War, nobody expected there ever to be a war. Nobody thought it would last. Well, you know the rest of the story.
Yeah, I was reading an interview you recently did, and just kind of take it into the investment sphere now. You mentioned that silver was a better investment in your eyes than gold was. Can you explain why you think that?
Well, I happen to own both of them. Here's a little silver right here, just in
Yep.
case. But also, here's a little gold in case. What I said was that on a historic basis, silver is down 40 or 40% or so from its all-time high. Gold is making all-time highs. So that says to me that silver is cheaper on a historic basis. And if I were buying one today, I would buy silver. But I own both. I'm not selling either. I expect to buy more. Who knows when? Because I do know, Danny, that when things go really wrong, all of us peasants want some gold in the closet. We want some silver under the bed because we know whether it's right or wrong. And the academic economists will tell you, ignore silver, ignore gold. Okay, I'm an old peasant, and us old peasants know we better have some when things go wrong.
Yeah, Jim, if you're a peasant, I don't know what I am, like an ant or something.
Well, I hope you learn, go out and meet some peasants and ask them about gold and silver.
Will do. Well, you also mentioned agriculture. That was another big thing on your list. How do you play agriculture? Do you look at fertilizer stocks, farmland? Like, how does Jim Rogers go about that?
Well, there are many ways. And please, I don't want to speak for other people, but you mentioned you can buy tractors, you can buy
Mhm.
fertilizer. There are many ways to invest in agri. You can buy cotton futures, you can buy corn futures. There are many ways to invest in agriculture. You can invest in Australia, which is an agricultural country. You know, if agriculture does well, agricultural economies do well. So there are many ways to in play. But I will please urge you again, if you don't know what corn futures are, don't invest in corn futures. Please learn about what you're doing. And if you know a lot about farming, the best way, a good way, I should say, is buy a farm and plant some crops. You'll get extremely rich. Your crops will go up in price. Your farmland will go up in price. Everybody will come around and want to marry your son or your daughter. Now, there are many ways to play.
Any other big opportunities you see out there aside from silver and agriculture?
Well, there are always some opportunities. I don't know many right now because if you're talking about stock markets, most stock markets are either at or near all-time highs. The U.S. stock market is at an all-time high, but that's true of even Japan. I mean, the Japanese stock market was down for 35 years. That's not a typo, 35 years. And now it's making all-time highs. So most stock markets are doing extremely well. So if you ask me, it's hard to find an opportunity in stocks or even in most investments. Chinese stock market is one of the few that's down, but other than China, most stock markets are going through the roof because there's been so much money printing in the past few years everywhere.
Where do you see the world heading, Jim? Like, if you were to extrapolate 10 to 20 years from now, how does the world look? Does it look more decentralized, more deglobalized, or do we go back to a globalized society? Where's the trends taking us?
Well, if you look back in the past, go back to England, for instance. I mean, when England was the number one power, that changed. And when it changed, a new power rose, the US. I mean, we became the replacement of the UK. The US dollar became the replacement of the pound sterling. There's always somebody rising and somebody declining. And that's happened throughout history. It's going to happen again. I don't know who the new power will be. Well, let's put it this way. I don't know what the new currency will be. I know the US dollar has pressure and problems, but I don't see a currency to replace it. Theoretically, it would be the Chinese currency, but the Chinese currency is not even convertible. So you can't have an international currency that's not convertible. They are changing that, but very slowly. So as I look around the world right now, Danny, I don't quite see where to go, either with my currency or my investments. Yes, I own gold. Yes, I own silver, but I don't have 100% of my money in silver, I assure you. And I don't have 100% of my money in anything. Well, I do have a lot of US dollars right now because historically, when there's a problem, they look for a safe haven. For historic reasons, most people think the US dollar is a safe haven. So I own a lot of dollars. I expect that when the big turmoil comes, the dollar will go up a lot because everybody will be seeking safety. But that will be the last move as far as I can see. I hope if it happens, I hope I'm smart enough to sell my dollars. But Danny, I don't know where to go. I hope maybe you can give me an answer. I don't know. Everybody has to put their money somewhere. But even if we tried to put all of our money in silver, then what do you do? I mean, you can't go down to the grocery store and say, I need a loaf of bread. Here, I've got a bar of silver, or I've even got silver coins. Can't live your life that in the world as we know it. You cannot live your life that way yet.
Yeah, most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I mean, your best bet is just to have like a bunch of junk silver, I guess, like old quarters and things of that nature, because the average Joe is not going to be able to tell what a silver round is or like a silver bar is.
Very perceptive, yes. How do we live? I mean, something will evolve. It always has during emergencies. Human beings figure out a way to survive and to adapt. But I wish I knew right now. I don't know the answer yet.
Hmm. So if you look at the total total makeup of gold to global assets allocation, it's about 1%. So gold makes up about 1% of total global assets. In the 1980s, it made up 26%. In the 70s, it was 30%. What's the likelihood that we retrace back to those levels? And if, not those levels and, a level, much higher than it is today, will we get back to a 26% allocation of gold?
Well, who know? I do know that when emergencies come and when there's turmoil, people look for something. And historically, humans have always used gold as a safe haven or silver, and we probably will try again, at least for a while. I mean, gold and silver do have problems, but we got to use something, and I don't see anything else on the horizon yet. I don't see an alternative currency yet. Uh, I don't. I'm looking. That's one of the reasons I'm talking to you. I need an answer. So you have to come up with the answer for all of us, or somebody does. And human beings always change. They have to change when there's a panic or an emergency. But I don't know what it will be yet. I assure you, I'm looking.
Yeah, so you mentioned that people are trying to find where exactly to park their money. What's also as equally important, if not more important, is where to physically park yourself, i.e., where to locate yourself, etc. My kind of what I surmise is that you want to go somewhere that's neutral. You don't want to go in the event of a major breakout of war or something to that nature. You don't want to be anywhere that's on one side of the spectrum or the other. You kind of want to go somewhere that's out of it. In your eyes, are there any neutral countries in the world that are not aligned with breaks, that are not aligned with the West, or will this be simply like could this be like a repeat of like the Guadalcanal story, right? The guy who moved to Guadalcanal during World War II, hoping to escape the chaos, but then he finds himself, entrenched in it.
Well, maybe it's Guadalcanal. I mean, maybe nobody's going to move to Guadalcanal. Maybe there'll not be a big war in Guadalcanal next time. But Dan, to answer your question, I don't know because the point you make is very good. Wherever you pick, who knows what will happen because armies, governments, politicians, they always look around for what to do next. And who knows where they might wind up. I don't know right now. I don't know if it's Atlanta. I don't know if it's Guatemala. I have no idea. If you know the answer, please send me an email.
All right, Jim. Well, what we've been doing on this show for the last several episodes is we've been asking every guest if there's any book or books that they recommend the audience look into. What books do you think that the people who watch this show, that the retail investor should read and get acquainted with?
Well, I mean, I read when I was starting out some investment books that taught me a lot. I mean, Ben Graham, as you may have heard of Ben Graham. He wrote a book called The Intelligent Investor, which taught me a lot about investing. I mean, you might say, well, it's out of date. No, the stuff he was talking about are eternally relevant. Uh, Things like buy low and sell high. But he was explaining how you figure out what is low and what is high. I mean, it's a basic fundamental investment book. There have been hundreds of investment books. I'm sure many of them are great and terrific. That's certainly one I remember when I was young in the business. He wrote
Yeah,
it
I
very
actually have that
close.
book up here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right there on the top shelf right there. So I recommend it as well. Link to that is down below, guys, if you're interested. Also, Jim, another thing we've been doing is we're letting the guest, you in this case yourself, ask a question to my next guest. So if there's a question that you could pose to my next guest, what would it be?
Well, what I've alluded to before was I don't know which currency I should move to, or we all should move to. Yes, I have a lot of US dollars for historic reasons. But in the next time around, will the US dollar be the place? If you'd asked me 100 years ago, we would have all said the pound sterling. And of course, that was exactly the wrong place to go. And so my question, and I own a lot of US dollars, and most people would say US dollar. Well, okay, yes, but what about next time? And I don't have that answer yet. And I would like to find it.
Good question.
If your next guest knows the answer, please send me an email.
All right. Well, I'll ask him and I'll let you know what he says. So the question from my previous guest to you, I just had Patrick Kareem on the show, and he wants to know
if you had to choose, I don't know if he does TA there, but if I told him that he could do fundamentals or TA, but he could not do both. He had to choose one. He had the opportunity to look at a chart or had the opportunity to never look at a chart. Okay, ask that one. If you had the opportunity to charts don't exist and charts existed, even if which one would he choose?
Well, I would use fundamental analysis because I think I understand it a little bit. And I certainly I read what the technicians say, and I know a little bit about what they say and think, but I would use fundamental analysis rather than technical. And partly because usually when something starts changing dramatically, it's stuff we haven't thought of, and there aren't any charts, and much less fundamentals to rely on. But I would start with fundamental analysis.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jim. Any concluding thoughts before we wrap things up? Also, tell us where we can find you.
Well, I live in Singapore, but please don't come knocking on my door.
We'll post your address in the description box below. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, my fundamental, my last note is, please figure out which currency, where we should all put our money, because that's what I have to look for that every day. I own a lot of US dollars. I am an American citizen, et cetera, et cetera. But even if I weren't an American citizen, the US dollar is the world's #1 currency. But I can see that might change. So my question to you, excuse me, and the next guest is, what currency do we revert to as things start changing? And the problem is they may change very fast. They have in the past. So we need to know early. So please let us know early.
All right. Well, yeah, that question will be asked on the next interview I have. So thank you again so much, Jim. It's been a pleasure. And if you guys enjoyed the show, be sure to comment down below. Go, Jim, go. Go, Jim, go. Also, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. 88% of you guys who watch this content are still not subscribed. Let's go ahead and flip that ratio around if you guys don't mind. Just hitting the little subscribe button. It takes less than a second and it's free. So if you enjoyed this video, do all that, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Nanny. Let us know how to save ourselves. Thank
Will
you.
do.
Thank you. Bye-bye.